So, last session in here today, I'd like to introduce Sarah and Chavis from Uber.
All right. I see people who want to talk about bots and allocations. Yeah? Right on. All right. Just as a reminder for anyone who wasn't in the keynote this morning, I'm Sarah Keller, Head of Technology Sourcing and Supply Chain at Uber. In addition to being responsible for our cloud spin, I also have responsibility for software asset management, AI and AI strategies, as well as obviously managing a pretty significant team, managing a lot of spend, and partnering with this guy.
Chavis, Richardson. My mic is way louder than yours.
Yeah, sorry if this is blasting.
So, Chavis Richardson, Director of Infrastructure and Cloud Finance, supporting the platform engineering team at Uber. So, we're going to you saw us earlier today. We're going to go a little bit more in detail about some of the things that we discussed there. I suppose I should sort of apologize in advance. It's going to get very financy. We're going to talk a little bit about CapEx and OpEx and direct costs and indirect costs. And so should be interesting, especially as we sort of talk about how it relates to Uber and its businesses.
Yep. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So we have a multi-cloud landscape. A little bit about our journey. We started off as a bare metal cloud, built up massive data centers, both in the United States as well as in China. We had a lot of isolated workloads we were doing there. We had a relationship with cloud early on, but it really wasn't significant. To be absolutely transparent, and if anybody's watched Super Pump, Chavis had a very specific concern that any sort of cloud could represent some risk to our business in a direct way or indirect way. So back in 2014, when we started with AWS, we really didn't have the ability to do much besides testing workloads, perhaps do a little bit of training, R&D, internal, but we really couldn't put any of our primary workloads on any cloud whatsoever. But that started to shift in 2017, probably timing a little bit with when Chavis left the company. And we started actually seeing the possibility of cloud. We brought on our partner with Google. That relationship was really structured around how to scale our business globally. I think if you were to take a ride on Uber back in 2018, 2017, early days, you would have felt really different if you were in the United States or China. But if you were in Singapore or London, latency was a real concern. So we did a lot of work with Google early on to build our network edge. We were able to expand pretty rapidly, as well as improve latency and performance. And we didn't see a cost increase significantly. In fact, actually, if you looked at it, I had built a network when I was over at Meta that required we put POPs all over the world. Now we have the ability to expand the footprint rapidly. We have the ability to superhighway back to our own physical infrastructure. It was the best of the hybrid approach. Expanding in the same time period, we had a partnership with Microsoft. Now that partnership again was bespoke on specific products. If you go into a car today, the driver, how do you know that the driver is who you think it's supposed to be? Now in the delivery side, I'm gonna be really transparent. It can be a little bit messed up. Maybe you got Sonia that was supposed to bring you your food and it's Sonia's boyfriend. But if you're in the car itself, it requires a face API. The app itself will not work. That was a product we worked with Microsoft. Again, it was something that was custom to our business use case, but delivered via Azure. And then lastly, in 2022, we started a version of a relationship with Oracle. Again, this is intended as a capacity play with a long-term strategy for automation and optimization. But the peak part of this is we kept trying to manage our clouds without a real clean version of a strategy. It was a journey that had many starts and stops. It had some inconsistencies in flow. But if we started to think about why, we start to see that at Uber scale, it's essential for us to maintain not only a competitive balance, and as a sourcing professional, I'll be honest, you always want somebody else in the mix to create the competitive threat. But the other part of it, and this is a particular important part, was after COVID, not all products are equal. Maybe if they look the same on paper, but when you actually put them into your own stack, it doesn't work the same. The additional part of this is we also found that not all the right products are available at the right time in the right location. Having multiple partners in the mix not only helps us keep the economics improved, but it also ensures that our product never gets bound by capacity. We have the ability to work with many partners. We don't block the business from an infrastructure perspective. So we've done all this work. We put up all these relationships. There are some crazy contracts behind all of this. And after the trip, what comes next? So as a sourcing professional, I would tell you, I have a lot of personal feelings about the relationships that I've built. But I would also tell you I had this, it was an existential fear. How do I know that what I've done is holding? How do I make sure that it will actually continue to show the value that we thought we would do at the time that we put the purchase in place? So it's really, really hard to say when your entire price list is managed in the cloud, do you really know what's ever happening? Of course, you can use third-party tools or your own homegrown tools. You have a viewpoint, but almost all viewpoints are focused on allocation. They're also looking at forecasting, or how do you think about CUDs and CUD management? But really, how often do you guys look at what happens on the bill? I like to think of it as the dirty little secret in cloud, because ultimately, you've done all of this planning, all of this work, there is leakage. So, starting with the sexy world of invoice audits. I know this is a fascinating topic, and I wouldn't tell you that it came from a place of like innovation curve. It came from a desperate necessity to go through and understand how our business worked. Every cloud invoice is reviewed for accuracy on two areas. The first would be, do the consumption trends during the period match our expectations? We did a lot of planning. Does it match plan? Really simple. That part, again, you can get through normal tooling. That part isn't necessarily that fancy. The part that we found was consistently missing from tooling, though, was the pricing that was applied to the actual invoice, not what you necessarily see in the portal, but to what was billed to you. Does it match? And I'm pointing out contracted terms can mean different things depending on which cloud provider you're working with. And I'm not talking about just bespoke enterprise-specific agreements. I am talking about, in some cases, publicly available capacity plans that you could just use. You put any sort of reserved capacity in place. There are mistakes. These do not come through the systems always correctly. In some cases, you'll find that even the timing of when those apply doesn't match when you put your order in. And depending on the size and the scale, it can mean a lot of money. So how do we think about this when you really just have 4 providers? You have many different variables. We had to think about this in the perspective of creating our own sanity point, which I'm calling the golden key. It's how do you take tens of thousands of potential SKUs to a list that matters? I don't necessarily care about parts of the world I'm not doing business in. I don't care about every product, but there are certain products that I've negotiated or I had a very specific plan that I need to now know, and I create my own plan of record. It does not sit in the portal. It does not sit in a cloud-managed tool. It sits in-house. Now, that doesn't mean I'm anti-cloud. Let me be very transparent. Putting a big database in the cloud is easy. The part I'm saying is you have to have a very specific, complete view of all providers' prices that you can then chase and go back and look at. With us, because we started this journey several years ago, when I started working with the FinOps side, we had the 80-20 rule. 20% of the SKUs drive 80% of the cost. Okay, track those, check for variance, make sure those prices work. I had a small team of about 3 analysts that did that work for us, just looking for leakage. We found errors. Now, I would tell you, were there other errors? Absolutely. But again, were those errors like driving a major difference in our plan or variance? Probably not. But as our cloud presence grew, we had to really rethink this because there was enough data points that told us there was real leakage here that we had to do something different. Bots to the rescue. So we tried a view of how do we automate these resources? We ended up looking at a process flow, going to my RPA team, and I said, here's my problem. I would like to take a view of every portal API pool for Invoice. I'd like to understand what the public rate cards are, which requires scraping, which is not the easiest thing from a bot perspective. I'm going to tell you, my fintech team really wanted me to do something different, but I said it was absolutely essential. We have to see what the public rate card is and compare it to what my private portal price is. Additionally, I have to compare it to itself. Is it changed since last month? Has it changed since last year? And then the last piece is my golden key. What price did I think I was going to get? How does that actually look in practice? And then a pricing error report comes monthly. So I now have an output that comes to my team via Slack. How many discrepancies? I will tell you the first time the bot ran, we only ran it on a certain percentage of our stack. It was actually on IaaS services. We didn't really think there was going to be much that came from it. And we were shocked. There was over 400 errors in the first report. Okay, must be the bot itself, right? So we did a lot of work going back and going through the report. I have an analyst, again, who goes through and actually takes that error report and goes and compares it to what now a human is double-checking the bot. They're true. They're real errors. Sometimes it was like tiny, tiny micro errors. Sometimes there were millions of dollars of errors, just to be transparent. So with this process, we were able to really automate how this looks. A process that would have taken a human hours takes us minutes. We also have now a process that's taken us from the 80-20 rule to 100%. So in flow, if you were to actually really diagram it out, this is what it looks like. You can see it right there. The flow itself isn't that complicated. It is the combination of using RPA and the flow that makes it a little bit more advanced. If I were to do this with the number of SKUs that we track in the golden key, it would have taken me 24 resources. To do it this way, I have 2 and some bots. If I paid for this service directly, it would cost me over $1 million a year, even with my cheapest resources. To do it the way that I've done it, it's sub $300,000 a year. So if I were to look at this and say, was this like a FinOps strategy? I would say, yeah, we're thinking about how to optimize, how to create governance that keeps us on track for what we thought was going to happen. How do we then move the label so that labor isn't sitting as so labor intensive? So after the audit is complete and my resources have looked at it, we actually provide a report that goes back to the engineering resources that are approving the invoice. The intention behind this is a little bit of a checks and balance. It's not because we don't trust that engineers don't have the time to review their invoices, but let's be honest, that's not the first thing that they're thinking about. They're looking at top-level variances and usage variance. They don't necessarily think about pricing governance. So we give them a viewpoint every month that lets them know invoice is good to pay. We also give a viewpoint of where some of the changes could have occurred. This is a sample of a report. I wouldn't tell you, again, like it has to look this way. It just happens to be this is how our report looks. But what we've accomplished in this is every month before we pay, we've either established what kind of errors occurred, including establishing support tickets. And if the error is high enough, we can also then start creating a flag that says, hey, cloud provider, I'm gonna pay less than my invoice until you resolve this issue. And I wouldn't tell you every cloud provider would be happy with that, but the point of bringing this up is it allows us to create deeper accuracy at the time of payment versus trying to go after the money after the fact. So it helps us be more accurate. It also allows me to work with my finance partners to give a flag on the play. Hey, we're seeing X amount of overspend because of a pricing variance. Put a flag on it. Because they now know that there's a correction that's gonna come into the business that they can also plan for too. We are also tracking this actually in a JIRA process. It's an expansion we're doing where we're bringing SLA violations and pricing governance issues together. That allows us to then break apart any sort of credit memos and tie it back on a ticket-by-ticket basis. So at any time, I know exactly how much money is outstanding, I know which provider it's coming from, and I can estimate the time frame. But again, if anybody's ever gone through one of these kinds of violations, it can be a while before you see your money. So again, from an accounting perspective, this at least allows us to have some point of record internally we can point back to explain why we expect the credit we're expecting. We can tie it back to the ticket, we can tie it back to our own internal management. And we can also monitor and make sure that those payments are making their way back to us. So, errors and risks. Okay, what are the types of issues that we see most commonly? We see that the billing rate does not match the contract. That is actually one of the most common ones, though again, I think you could probably argue that this is a timing issue sometimes too, right? It's a point of time. It's also sometimes quite literally issues like the public website gave a better price than what you had in your own portal. It was static. You have a custom price view, it didn't come through. They made a change, and they made a change on your price. They shouldn't have made a change on your price. I even had one situation where out of the blue, my credit or my discount for service disappeared. Why did it disappear? I don't know. We had to go back and correct it. So I'm giving examples of the types. I would also give you a highlight that contract can have many, many meetings. I'm not just talking about, as an enterprise customer with a large cloud spend, a custom pricing agreement. In many cases, I am talking about the public committed use plans. Those have mistakes too. I talked about the public rate being better than the portal rate. Again, these systems are not intentionally disconnected, but if you talk to the cloud providers, their back-end systems and their front-end systems rarely actually talk. They're not connected. You can have a unique product team that pushes a product price change and not actually have it come through the pricing system correctly. You also have situations where maybe something is locked in a way that isn't appropriate. A change has happened. Why did that change happen? So without having the golden key and without having a tracking, we would have a drifting that could happen in the business. So the reason why we do this is the risk. For us in 2023, our billing error rate across all cloud providers was 6.7% of our spend. Now, that isn't trying to go reverse math, like what your spend was, and then take this as a percentage. I wouldn't even tell you that our highest spend equaled the highest error rate. What I would tell you, though, is that these types of errors we saw consistently across all of our providers in some form or fashion. So the reason to bring this up to the FinOps teams and for you guys to hear this isn't because I think that they're trying to do a bad job or trying to treat us badly. That's not what I'm saying at all. I am saying that everybody is trying to build these systems up from scratch. And if you're in a FinOps practice and all you're thinking about is allocation and capacity planning, and you're not looking at this, I have 6.7% of my spend that would tell you you should look at this. So after we've done this work, a key part of our journey started in defining what we needed from the cloud providers at a product and service level. It shifted towards the efficiency optimization journey, which is what the bots help us with now. And we're now shifting a lot of our attention on allocations and what to do with the landed costs after that invoice was paid. This is where our allocation strategy comes into play.
Thank you, Sarah. So again, earlier today, we kind of talked through this, and again, you're going to see this slide, and we're going to build on this slide slowly. So I want to kind of take a little bit more time on this specific slide to talk about a couple of things so that we kind of build together. Well, first of all, right, like for us at Uber, we have this concept. It's our networking, our infrastructure expense is actually, we call it networking expense. It's an old legacy thing, and no one can get rid of it. So, but this is really like, for us, our expense is considered a cost of revenue. And as any of you kind of remember from your intro to finance, intro to accounting, cost of revenue is a variable cost item. It's tied to product profitability. Sort of teams and groups are constantly looking for ways to sort of drive savings on this cost line item to show, like, through contribution margin, that they're continuing to increase the profitability of their business. And so for us, this concept is really everything that we do related to cloud, data center, rent, power, physical network, software, direct hands, DNA associated with leases, et cetera. All of those line items sit within this concept for us is called total cost to serve. Again, you take that total cost to serve, you divide it by all the trips of all the various products, which we're going to talk a lot about later on, and you're going to end up at a place where you're going to come out with a sort of above EBITDA expense that we charge back to all of our businesses, and you're going to come to a below EBITDA expense, which sits with corporate P&L, right? So when looking at that, you're basically going to have, for this example, you're going to have our Uber X product, which I'm assuming most of you, show of hands, have used Uber and the Uber X product, right? So that's going to be our kind of, everyone can understand what this is. Right, and for some of you, you may have taken a Uber Moto product. Uber Moto is in some of our LATAM, APAC markets. It's another type of product. You can actually get a ride on the back of a scooter. Has anyone taken an Uber Moto product?
Hey.
All right, so we have at least one person. So again, you can kind of see that these products are going to be very different, and we're going to get into why it's important to kind of note the differences with these products. And then again, you can look down and within the box and you can see all the other products, or you can look at your app and see all the other products that we kind of use as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Each of these products have their own average fare. They are uniquely different. And because of that, each of them has a cost to serve as a percentage of net revenue that is also different. So again, everything from point A to the end, from all the way upstream with sourcing and doing the audits to what we actually charge them, is kind of our big sort of like, this is how the sausage is made. So traditionally, what you're going to end up seeing is you're going to look to see, hey, I want to control costs. What do I need to do to reduce costs? And you're going to look at efficiency initiatives, you're going to look to CUD strategy, you're going to look at RI strategy, you're going to look at all of these means by which you can reduce costs. That's the easiest, right? That's what everyone is going to look to do. That's what kind of the sort of overarching goal of FinOps is, right? And second, you're going to try to increase the business, right? Again, you reduce the numerator, you increase the denominator, the number gets smaller, right? That is just basic elementary math. So we're not recreating anything, but for the most part, that was kind of our approach. Our approach was, let's find all the ways that we're spending money. Let's figure out a way to be more effective, a way to be more efficient. Let's increase utilization. Let's use more CUDs. Let's try to find other opportunities. Or let's keep growing the product. Let's keep making new businesses. Let's push into new markets. Let's continue to do all of these things. And that worked, and then it didn't work, right? In 2020, COVID hit the planet, and as you can see, almost every major Uber market basically came to a halt, right? The top left is Tokyo, the middle is my hometown of Los Angeles. The upper right is Paris. The bottom left is Rio. You have Mexico City. And then bottom right is New York. These are real pictures, right? This is the result of a pandemic and a business that is largely dependent on the movement of people and things basically comes to a stop. Well, most of you know, right? The cloud agreements, data center leases, power agreements that you have with the providers, that doesn't stop. Those things continue for whatever the period of time that you have. Your leases are, for your hardware lease, that's a 4 to 5 year agreement. Data center leases, 4 to 5 year agreement. CUDs, 1 to 3 year agreement, right? Contract minimums. Right? These are things that just do not go away. And so for a business that had largely believed that this cost was variable, they were actually finding out that a vast majority of that expense was fixed, right? They could not get out of deals. They could not avoid the minimum expense that they had to pay. They could not exit data centers without paying massive penalties, right? So we were trying to figure out, like, how do we control a cost that historically we thought we were doing a good job at, right? Well, we also know that the businesses are fundamentally different. So again, show of hands, Uber X people, right? How many of you have ever taken an Uber Black? All right? One of my absolute favorite features of any Uber product is that I can control the AC in a car before I even get in, right? It's like 90 degrees, the Uber will be a cool 72, right? But I can't do that in an Uber X. I can't do that on a motorbike. So like, why am I charging them the same cost even though the product is clearly different, right? Like, this is not a way that anyone can drive or do anything that shows any real advantages from being more efficient, from using less capacity, from being more upfront in the tech curve and like using new technologies. None of that is happening. And so lastly, if we know that that's the case, and we know that the products are different, and we know that the average fares are different, and yet I'm giving everyone the exact same cost, I'm impacting the margin of each of our products significantly differently. So if you're a moto trip, you're paying, a couple, maybe $1 or $2 for a trip. And if you're an Uber X or an Uber Black, for those of you who are big Uber Black riders, you're paying multiple times more. Well, the cost would have been the same. And so the impact to margins would have been vastly different. And when you're looking to be in low price markets and you want to be try to continue to grow, every impact of that dollar spent is going to be a reason for you to not stay. So we're impacting and making decisions that were driving negative results to the businesses in ways that we did not want. So when we kind of took a step back, we realized that we kind of need to revisit the core aspect of our business, right? And so with that, we sort of came up and said, all right, we know we have trip serving demands and responsibility, right? So these are basically any consumption required to actively serve a trip, right? Meaning, if this wasn't on, this thing wouldn't work. If you wanted a ride, then we turned that off, you couldn't get a ride, right? And then we had what we call non-trip serving. So these were our pre and post-trip expenses. So again, for the, we like Uber Eats. Well, I hope everyone likes Uber Eats, right? So you use Uber Eats. Well, when you go to a restaurant, if the restaurant only had 2 things, you probably wouldn't order from Uber Eats. So we have to build catalogs. We have to ensure that we have a large enough number of restaurants and a large enough number of services that if you were to select them and go into greater detail, you can find the things that you want. You can find the right promotions. You can make sure that you get the right dessert. You can get the right soda. You can get all of these things, right? So all of that information we have to have for everyone, whether you pick to order from that restaurant or you decide to go and get it yourself. We have to have that available to you. So that's what we would consider a pre-trip cost. And then the post-trip costs, right? We have to care for a variety of reasons, whether they're regulatory reasons or for our own individual reasons, for dealer audits, et cetera, right? We have to maintain a ton of information for every trip that's taken. We have to, where were you picked up? Where were you dropped off? Who was the driver? Who was the deliverer? Did you tip? Why didn't you tip? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these things we have to maintain. So kind of saying, all right, well, if this is our sort of, requirements, then how do we sort of evaluate this from an engineering standpoint? So we have what we consider production and non-production costs. So production costs are basically costs that reflect this cost of revenue. So if we were to kind of put together, you're going to say, okay, the upper left, that is active requirements in order to sustain the business. Bottom left is basically requirements that we have to continue to support the business. That's our production costs. To the right, you're going to have sort of like non-production costs. The non-production costs are going to be sort of consumption for other aspects of the business. Your finance team uses an Oracle EPM and you have your own private instance, right? You have a developer team and your developer team uses resources to help engineering productivity, et cetera, right? All of those other ones you cannot charge to the business, right? That is a sort of key sort of gap reporting thing. You cannot charge non-business price costs to the business. That negatively impacts margins. That gives bad messaging to the street, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with that said, we kind of very quickly realized our problem. This is all of our OpEx expense. This is all of our friends in engineering and finance. And there's our direct expense. So this again is now your expense that actively is happening during the trip. There's my indirect expense. That's everything I need before the trip and after the trip. Well, there's more OpEx expense. I don't know why that's there. And then there's other. Whatever is other. So all of this is my cost to serve. And this makes running the business extremely difficult because you don't know what the other is. You don't know why you are charging the business with additional OpEx. You don't know if that's correct. You don't know if that's going to solve any problems, right? The tags, the thing that we like always talk about how bad you need to tag everything. Well, like it's all tagged. It's clearly identified. Everything in there is working the way it's supposed to, but now I'm not sure if I should be charging the business or should I be charging an engineering team? Should I be charging a finance team? Should I be charging a marketing team? I don't know. So we kind of really focused on kind of better understanding what's in this direct bucket, right? We really went through with our teams to kind of look at all the various ways that we can impact and drive improvements on the direct costs. This is how engineering teams, we could literally say to them, while you're running the ride for a specific ride, maps, because we ping the map every 2 seconds, our cost per trip is X. If you were to change from every 2 seconds to every 5 seconds, here's how that cost would go down, right? For core services, for any of the other teams that are directly impacting the costs that we have, they can see how their expenses are going to change our costs to the business, and we can measure that and make adjustments, and we can do things so that help the profitability, the direct profitability of those trips, right? Then we have the indirect. Now, indirect, you're going to talk about doing various strategy changes. Hey, you're going to make the decision. How long are you going to keep something? Are you going to retain every trip in perpetuity? Are you going to only keep a trip for whatever required legal holds? Are you going to kind of maybe take some of that data out of warm tier storage or hot tier storage and put it in cold tier storage, which will help us reduce costs? All of these kinds of things now we can have conversations about. We can make strategy decisions that help us make sort of like better ideas for the organization, which again helps to drive down total costs. Now we're going to kind of get rid of some of this OpEx expense that we thought we had identified all of it. Now we can clearly see who exactly is using it and how are they using it and why we're charging them. We can now set better targets for budgets for them. We can say, hey, year-over-year growth expected for OpEx expense, 5%, 10%, whatever. We can really now kind of rein that cost in because it's not lost in the mix of all the direct expense. We know for a fact that when we say to someone at the end of every year and during planning, hey, your expense is $25 million, based off of your growth rate, based off your headcount, based off your initiatives, we're not expecting to see growth of greater than 5%. You have a cost target. We can hold them accountable. We can hold leaders accountable to targets that we did not have the capability to hold them accountable before. And lastly, now we're really going to talk about how our engineering team is doing their development, right? We can ask questions. Why have dev clusters and zones grown faster than the business? How are we using information that we had that today may be based off of trip data and maybe based off of some testing that we're in the future are going to potentially become new features and new services? We can really have a greater understanding of the potential impact of those features, and those new services are going to be to the bottom line for the businesses that choose to adopt each of those services that were developed in isolation. This kind of left direct in the box, this is what becomes our new future state cost to serve. Right? This is now a true representation of our business costs. This is what each of our products can now say, like, hey, during a trip, I anticipate having a cost of X, my carrying cost or Y, and the required cost for capacity that I have in advance of serving any trip is Z. They can make decisions, they can drive changes, they can do a number of different things in the organization to help themselves manage their costs. And as a FinOps team, we can hold each one of those teams accountable to making sure that they bring home the results that they were expected to bring home. Simple math, I get rid of a bunch of stuff. This has to be cheaper. So now I have a product that's really addressing the needs of the business, and I'm addressing the business needs cheaply or cheaper, I don't want to say cheaply, cheaper than I was addressing the needs before, and I've already been able to identify all the various opportunities that those teams have to improve their costs in the future. So when you kind of take this framework, and I know framework is a big deal, so I'll try not to say it too many times, but when you apply this framework and you now revisit our original problem statement, you see that things go just a little bit differently. We've identified and attributed all product costs, right? And that product cost is based off of the allocations that we gave to those teams and the consumption that they have. We're now able to measure and monitor the various costs by their direct and their indirect natures. We're able to communicate with the teams in ways that it now enables them to understand what's happening, right? This means that there's more cost insights. Originally, there was a slight difference on the Moto. The wallet next to the Moto was like a lot smaller because they're no longer the same. But you can identify these insights, and now you can really work with the teams to drive home savings and costs, right? This is kind of where there's an opportunity area for each team to sort of figure out where they can deliver the most impact. You want to increase feature set? Do you work on tech debt? How is this feature going to add to your costs? How it is working and finishing your tech debt or eliminating tech debt? How does that help lower our total costs? Right now, teams can be sort of optimized in ways that they would help make sure that their products are bringing home the cost that we expect to see. And lastly, if you work on the cost side, you continue to show performance on the top line, you're going to see higher margins and greater operational efficiency. So this has kind of been like our process. This has kind of been the areas that we've really been pushing on. We still, even though that the FinOps box is in the run, we still, as they said earlier, no one's running or we're all not running or whatever.
We're still crawling.
We're walking in some aspects, right? Like we still get messaging from various engineering teams that say like my cost is, 2.4 cents. And we're like, no, it's not. It's not 2.4 cents. Your cost is significantly higher than that. You're not including the cost of development. You're not including your indirect expense. You're not including all of these other costs that you have the opportunity to control, which are weight around the neck of some of our less profitable businesses that are causing us potentially to make decisions that we shouldn't be making. So this is kind of how we have tried to build our team, which at this point is fairly large. So again, we have on the product side, we have on the engineering side, we have on the procurement side, our leadership, and then on our finance side, there's not a shirt for accounting. So some of these people are actually accounting, but we have been building and growing and working together in ways to try to build value for the company. We've really been trying to find opportunities to reduce costs in a variety of different ways, obviously upstream with the sourcing and the bots, and downstream with improved cost attribution. We've really been working with our engineering partners. One is here in the audience to kind of really make sure that we have the appropriate tooling. We've worked with the product teams to make sure we understand their unique use cases, that we can try to solve them. We can try to find them, whether it's additional tooling from the eng team, whether it's better understanding of the way our cost works. So we can do a number of things there. In leadership, we answer questions. So with that said, really appreciate everyone coming out. I know there's not a question and answer service, but Sarah, anything else?
Well, I think the only thing to bring up, and we talked a little bit about it this morning, and I know everybody's tired about hearing AI, maybe tired of hearing about SAM. But the thing about it is, like, Chavis and I both have to solve those problems too. We're not just solving cloud problems. We have to solve these other problems. And honestly, we talk to each other and it's like, well, shoot, it works for this. Why wouldn't it work this way? When we think about AI, consumption-based workloads, why wouldn't it work this way? I have workloads for AI that are sitting in my cloud costs. I have workloads that are sitting in my on-prem costs, but they are part of the cost of trip. I have a lot of opportunity in my software asset management to rethink how I manage my business and how I allocate those costs. So this is really the beginning of a journey. This is the start of the trip. We have no view of what comes next, but if anything has taught us anything, it's change is gonna happen. But if you build a solid foundation, we have a solid team, we have a good way of starting to think about it and wrap our arms around the business, and by no means is it perfect. I will tell you, we have more than enough places where we could show you the warts. We're not trying to pretend that we're something better than we are. But we are getting smarter about it, and we are trying to really bring how FinOps can make our business more adaptable and work better with our business in general. So if you guys want to talk to us, you want to learn more about bots, you want to learn more about allocation, come talk to us. We're happy to help. We want everybody to learn. With that, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
Keep it up. Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.